So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the CITIC Bookstore to join the Berggruen Seminar number 38, a reflection on speciesism. My name is Junfeng, and I'm today's host, and I work for the Berggruen Institute China. Now, before everything starts, let me first introduce the Berggruen Institute China, who initiates the Berggruen Seminar. Berggruen Institute China is a collaboration between the Berggruen Institute and Beijing University. Since 2018, the Institute has been engaging with outstanding thinkers to examine, share, and develop ideas in areas of frontier science, technology, and philosophy, ancient wisdom and global governance, and creative futures. Also, I would like to invite you to join the Berggruen audience WeChat group, as well as CITIC audience WeChat group, where both organizations will share their public events. And please also allow me to share about the Berggruen Prize Essay Competition, an annual competition with $50,000 awarded to the winner. This year's theme is consciousness, and deadline is September the 15th. You can submit the essay in English or Chinese. CITIC just published a book called The Blind Spot, and one of the authors is Adam Frank, a physicist who won the prize last year. The book is available here. Its Chinese title is 何为科学? You can find more information from the Berggruen Institute website. Also, my thanks go to tonight's venue provider, the CITIC Bookstore in Sanliitun. CITIC Bookstore is a national chain bookstore with a publishing background under CITIC Publishing Group. It creates a cultural space that integrates books, intellectual discussions, and fine food, serving people's pursuit of enriching ideas and a fulfilling life. Today's event focuses on the idea of speciesism. To readjust the tension between humans and nature, there's a stronger than ever emphasis on the concept speciesism that suggests an inherent yet often overlooked disparity in how humans treat different species. We're very honored to have Professor Oscar Horta and Professor Wei Benqun to join the discussion today. Oscar Horta is a professor of philosophy at the University of Santiago de Compostela. Previously, Horta was a researcher at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology and has been a researcher at different universities, including Rogers, Gothenburg, Rome, and Porto. He's also a founder of the charity organization Animal Ethics. He has more than 100 academic publications, most of them on the moral consideration of animals, including his latest book, Making a Stand for Animals, which is available on the podium. You can see the cover here. Our commentator, Wei Benqun, is a philosopher with a day job as assistant professor at Renmin University of China. Wei's main idea of research is meta-ethics, including the attempt to understand the presuppositions and commitments of our moral talk, thought, and practice. Over the years, he has devoted his attention to the metaphysical status of ethical values. So today, we will start by Professor Horta's keynote speech that will last 40 minutes, followed by Professor Wei's 15-minute commentary. And after that, they will exchange ideas for like 10 minutes, and we will have a Q&A session that's available for both online and offline audience. So for audience online, you're welcome to raise your comments and questions, and my colleagues will pass the questions to our speakers today. So I'll just handle the podium to Professor Horta. Let's give him a round of applause.
Okay. So, well, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here with you all. It's a huge honor for me to be, another guest speaker at this prestigious institution. I am really thankful to the Berggruen Institute and to everyone really who made this possible, especially the people who have been in touch with me, but also the rest of the team, because often when you are in an event like this, you thank the people who you have interacted with, and maybe there have been some other people around who have done it possible and you don't know them, so that's unfair with them. I don't want to be unfair, though probably I am. But anyway, so thanks to everyone that I should thank. Okay, so that being said, I'm gonna try, because they insisted on that, to make this like very available, not make it any technical. And you know, that's not always easy, because I come from the field of philosophy, and philosophers, you know, they deal with tricky concepts, they come up with these complicated ideas, and then when they try to make it easier, it's really tough for them, right? It's like the general public thinks, oh, these guys, you know, they want to look like, oh, look how intellectual I am, making it so difficult. They take pains on that. And it's the other way around. It's super difficult to say things in an easy way. It's much easier to say them in a difficult way. So, you know, I've tried to make it easier. I don't know. Maybe I haven't succeeded in that. Maybe I went too far. Whatever. I mean, I just did my best. Now it's too late. I can change it. It's been prepared. I hope it's useful. So here you have the codes that you were talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So now we are going to see what we are talking about today. So the name that was included in the title of this presentation was about speciesism. And now we are getting into the issues. This word actually changed my life. I once read this word and I was, what is this? And my life actually changed out of that. Actually, guess what happened? I went into a train trip and I had this book, and the book was Animal Liberation, and I was reading it. And, you know, I was already someone who was involved in animal protection and all that, but I hadn't read anything about it. You know, this was the summer of 1994. Yes, I'm that old. And I had started to study economics because I wanted to learn how the world works, because I wanted to improve the world. I wanted to change it. I wanted a better world. And then I read that book, but then I read that chapter. And when I got to that word, it was like my mind like spin. It's like, of course, speciesism. And then I decided to quit economics and studied philosophy. Maybe it would have been better if I studied economics, but you know, the author, Peter Singer, who has been here before, he told me it's gonna be very hot there in Beijing when I told him I was coming here. And, you know, he was a philosopher. I wanted to do good. I saw that he was a philosopher too. So, okay, yeah, I'll do this. Years later, many years later, I told this to Peter, so Peter Singer, and he was like, oh, yeah, okay, well, thanks for telling me. But really not such big thing for him. I mean, everyone tells him this. Anyway, whatever. So what this word means, speciesism, is it's a term for a discrimination, the discrimination of those who don't belong to a certain species. What is discrimination? Discrimination is like a comparative concept. So you discriminate against someone when you are treating that individual worse than others, right? But of course, sometimes you treat someone worse than others for justified reasons. Like, I may give some money to someone and not to someone else. Well, I give money to someone because they had gave me something else, you know? I was buying, I'm treating worse the other guy. Oh, you didn't give me any money. Yeah, but it was justified that I did that, right? And it's not just about how we treat others, it's also about how we consider others, how we think of others, right? So that is what it means to be speciesist, to, you know, treat or consider someone in a way that is worse and that is unjustified, right? And you don't do this out of the blue just because it just so happens that you do so. No, no. You actually do so with all the ones who don't belong to a certain species, right? So there is a species gap here. And then there is this position which is called anthropocentrism. So anthropocentrism is the view that only humans matter, or that only humans matter like completely. Maybe other individuals, other beings in the world matter too, but they matter less, all right? So this is a view that many people have. The question here is whether anthropocentrism is actually a form of speciesism. Maybe it's not, or maybe it is, right? Maybe it's not a form of anthropocentrism, maybe it's justified, so it's not a form of discrimination, it's just okay, but maybe it's not okay and it is speciesism. So this is what we need to answer. What are the reasons that we can give in order to defend anthropocentrism, right? So we're going to explore this a bit in this first part of the presentation, right? And then we'll see a bit of the implications this may have. So in order to say that anthropocentrism is right, a bunch of different things have been claimed. So many people claim that, anthropocentrism is right by definition. Like, for instance, to suppose that they are treating someone in a way that we consider that is inadequate. Sometimes people claim, how can they do that to them? They are human, right? You don't treat human beings like that. They say this without giving any further reason, meaning that somehow being human is a synonym of being someone we need to respect. Now, I don't have anything to object to this in principle. The only problem is that then, if you are not human, hey, you are not going to be covered by the same protection. So that's an issue because we are not giving any further reason. It's just belonging to a certain species, Looks like an arbitrary concept to me, right? Oh, we are just going to give full respect to frogs. Why? Well, because they are frogs. Come on, they are frogs, right? Sounds weird, right? Why doesn't it sound weird when it comes to humans? Then sometimes people claim, humans deserve to be fully protected for reasons that are unverifiable, right? So some would say, only humans have some special importance, right? Some metaphysical superior status, some dignity that is unique. Then, what is it exactly that those words mean, right? This is something that we can empirically verify, and often they will say, no, it's just some intrinsic importance that they have. Well, that's not something we can verify. Or like when they say, only humans have an immortal soul, right? That's unverifiable. How can you verify that souls exist? How can you verify that humans possess them? How can you verify that no other animal possesses them? For all we know, maybe only cows possess immortal souls, right? We don't know that. That's why they are unverifiable. But then there are other reasons that are verifiable. Like, for instance, when you say, only human beings possess certain complex cognitive capacities, right? Well, this is something we can test, and we can see if this is the case or not, right? You can maybe do some tests. The test was passed, right? So this guy has these capacities. Maybe this other animal lacks them, right? And sometimes it may not be like cognitive capacities, maybe other things, like sometimes it's relations. We have a relation of sympathy with these individuals. We love these individuals, but we don't love those others. So we're not going to respect them, right? Or being in a situation of power, right? We are more powerful than animals, or than non-human animals. We should say maybe because humans, we're not vegetables or bacteria or fungi, we are animals as well. But maybe within humans, we have more or less the same power, so that would justify according to the argument. We are anthropocentric. And then finally, some people combine these ideas, right? And they say, well, it's because of this, but also because of that, things of the kind, right? I could explain this in more detail, but I don't want to be too boring or too technical. If you have any questions about this tricky classification, we can come back to it later. But then, if these are the claims, in order to see whether they are correct or not, we need to examine them. And in order to examine them, we can do so separately. So what happened first is that if we consider the claim that humans are more important, or that humans deserve special respect just because, in those cases, it looks like we are like, using some kind of reasoning that is like circular, right? Because we are not providing any further reasons, It's like we are saying, oh, this should be the case because of this, and this should be the case because of this. And we are going over and over without appealing to any further reason, that can really adequately ground our claim, right? This doesn't happen in the case of other criteria. If we are talking about reasons that are verifiable, oh yeah, those are different criteria, and those we can verify. That's a solid way to construct an argument. But if you say, oh, only humans possess an immortal soul, you are not providing me with any information on which I can examine whether that's the case. By the way, in the case of this appeal to immortal souls, there's something funny really with the argument. Because suppose this were the case, right? Suppose only humans had a soul, right? Then maybe if they kill me, well, I'll be back again. I'll reincarnate, and then I have another chance. If something happens to me, if they abuse me, they, I don't know, torture me to death, right? Now, I'll be born again, or maybe I won't be born again, but I will go to some heaven, to some paradise. I can get some compensation. But then the animal, if we torture the animal to death, there is no compensation for the animal. Oh, sorry, you lack an immortal soul, then no compensation. If that's so, what I think is then the animal should deserve more respect, right? The human, not so much, because, well, after all, it's not so bad for the human, right? Now, in addition to this, as we saw, there are other arguments that claim something like this. They say, we're just going to respect those that fall within the circle. And in order to fall within the circle, you need to meet some criteria, like the ones I mentioned before, that are verified. You need to have these complex capacities. You need to have some special relationships to be in a relation of power, and so on. Now, those who appeal to this think that all human beings will fall within that circle, right? The fact is, things are a bit more complex. Because if we speak about cognitive capacities, not only non-human animals lack them, there are also many human beings who don't possess them. And unfortunately for many, they may have some condition or suffer some accident. You may suffer, I don't know, some brain injury, and then you lose those capacities. Actually, any of us can be in such a situation, right? When the talk is over, you are walking, coming back home, and you or another friend are saying, well, that talk there, that was horrible. The speaker, what a bad talk he gave. And then maybe some divine punishment or something because you are saying those things. A car, because you are so focused in the conversation, so focused in criticizing what the guys here spoke about, then, there is some accident, some car crash or something, and then you hit your head against the ground or something, and you lose your capacities, right? So that means you are in the other group. Not only that, all of us, at least when we were very small, when we were babies, we didn't have those complex capacities. When I was like, I don't know, 3 months old, my cognitive capacities were much lower than those of many adult non-human animals. This is not an opinion, this is just a fact, right? Now, some people say, well, but babies, maybe if they don't have these capacities, they'll have them in the future. So we need to respect them because they'll have those capacities in the future. But what about, I don't know, a baby who has some disease and is not gonna make it to the future ever, right? It looks like we should respect that baby anyway, right? And then, having the potential of something. It's not like actually having that something when it comes to respecting someone. I mean, I have the potential of speaking Korean, right? I have the potential of being the president, you know? But I don't have the powers of a president because it just so happened that I'm not the president, even if I theoretically have the potential of it. And they're not going to hire me to be a translator into Korean because I have no idea of Korean. I may say, well, I have the potential, give me the job. Well, I'm giving you nothing, you know? So then it looks like if we want to grant full respect to all humans, we shouldn't be accepting this way of approaching things. And the same thing happens, by the way, if we speak about special relations. Because there are humans with whom no one has those special relations of love, sympathy, right? Like, I don't know, imagine the case of an orphan with no one who cares for her or him. I consider people who are in a weak position, like in wars, for instance, those who are abused, those who are killed, right? It seems intuitive that they should all deserve respect. So this would give us reasons, actually, to think that those criteria for moral consideration are wrong. We shouldn't be accepting them. Rather, we should probably draw a different line and respect everyone who can be harmed, who can be benefited by what we do to them, right? And we may think, what made that be? What is it that makes it the case that someone can be harmed or benefited? Well, we'll see that in a minute. But what's important to see here is that I'm not drawing here another arbitrary criteria. For all that matters, we can just delete completely the line. It's about respecting everyone who needs respect. Okay? Now, there's another way to look at it. So in order to see this, think of this metaphor. Imagine that we have this birthday cake, right? Which, by the way, has not been made using any animal products, right? It's a birthday cake that, you know, they prepared in some vegan restaurant around here in Beijing, where they have these wonderful places to eat without eating animal products. And the thing is, you see how that cake is cut? How come they cut it like that? Well, because they said, we're going to cut the cake, cut it into 4 different pieces. And someone cut it like that because they are grabby. They want to eat lots of cake. So they cut it like this. They give the other 3 pieces to other people, and they stick with the big one, right? Compare it with this. What happened in this case? Well, in this case, we used a different procedure. We told the guy who cut it, you're gonna cut it into 4 pieces, and then each of us is gonna grab a piece, and the last one, the remaining one, that's the one you're gonna eat. Oh, sorry, this is going too fast. Yeah, we're gonna stick. I didn't do anything. It just moved automatically when you are stuck for some time with this, with each slide. But no, this deserves more comment. So what happens here is that it looks like when you compare this way of cutting it with the other one, surely this is the just one, the fair one. The other one was unfair. Why was that? How did we make it the case that this was a fair result? That the procedure was fair, right? So suppose you are asked whether you think that anthropocentrism is right. You may very well say, sure, it's right. But then you are taking the piece of the cake. You are cutting the cake. You are benefited by anthropocentrism. So of course you say anthropocentrism is right. But what if you were to judge the issue from an impartial position? What if you didn't know if you were going to be born as a human or as an animal of a different species? Would you really choose a world where anthropocentrism existed or one when it didn't? Of course, you would choose the latter. It would be better for you. It would be fairer for everyone because the procedure is a fair one. So impartiality here leads us to conclude that that way of cutting the cake is the right and that anthropocentrism is not right. Okay? So next slide. There is another way of thinking of this. So imagine that you go one day, to the hospital, and they tell you, well, I have bad news for you, right? Unfortunately, you have this condition, and I don't know, 20 years from now, you are going to lose any cognitive capacities that you have, or any complex cognitive capacities, right? You'll end up having the cognitive capacities that some non-human animal would have, all right? And then they tell you, but then there's something else. You can take this pill now, and if you have the pill, then that's everything you're going to go through. But if you don't take the pill, then 20 years from now, after this happens to you, you're going to suffer some unbearable pain, excruciating pain, right? However, there is one thing. The pill tastes very bad, right? Now, should you take the pill or not? Well, of course, everyone would take the pill, wouldn't we? Of course, all of us would, right? But then, if we should only care about those who have these cognitive capacities, right? Or if we should care much more for those who have these cognitive capacities, then you shouldn't. Because when you compare, well, the bad thing of eating the pill, it doesn't taste good, that would have a more important weight than the excruciating suffering, wouldn't it? But obviously, we don't make decisions this way, right? So this also shows us that what matters in order to respect someone can't be having those cognitive capacities. And we could build, I'm not going to go through it to avoid being too boring, but we could build a very similar argument if we thought of any of the other reasons to defend this view, okay? So then it looks like what matters in order to receive moral consideration is sentience. Why is that? Because sentience is the ground for being benefited or harmed, right? Sentience is the capacity to have mental states, experiences that can be positive or negative. And that is what matters, right? And not only humans are sentient. We know this because the opposite would be, among other things, off in terms of evolutionary theory. Because sentience appeared at some point through natural history because it was useful. The animals that were sentient, they were better able to pass on their genes to new generations. Why is that? Because when you are sentient, you are motivated to act in certain ways rather than others, right? If something feels bad, you avoid it. If something feels great, you want it. A good way for surviving. In addition, it helps with decision making, right? Because when we are sentient, that's because we have mental states. And mental states allows us to think about things, allows us to reason, right? So that really is what matters, right? That capacity. It's not an arbitrary capacity. It's not about being an animal. Being a human, that's a more or less arbitrary rule. Being sentient is not. It's something totally different. And in addition of having this evolutionary consideration to think that not only humans are sentient, we have other reasons. Many animals, many non-human animals, have very complex behaviors. And it would be very difficult to explain how can that be without assuming that they are thinking. And we shouldn't just think of animals like, I don't know, dolphins or, I don't know, chimpanzees who are, very clever, elephants and so forth. No. Even invertebrates like octopuses or octopi have this amazing capacity. They can make very complex decisions. They solve quite complex problems, Even very small animals are amazing in this regard. So bees communicating, also these animals are amazing. But before that, let's talk a bit about bees. They communicate in very complex ways, and they also reflect. They even reflect on what other bees tell them. So there's this experiment that I find really amazing, and goes as follows. So they put some food for the bees, some flowers, with pollen and stuff that they could eat, and they put it inside a boat that was just at the shore of a lake, and then the bees, or some bees, got in, and they locked them up, which is the bad part of the experiment, the part that I don't like. And then they put this boat in the middle of the lake and released the bees. And then the bees came back to the colony, and they communicate where they found the food by considering the way back to the colony, not the way forward. So then, when they dance and they show the direction, they show how much food there was, they show how far it was, all these are elements of the grammar of bee communication. The other bees, who had a mental map of their surrounding, understood that they were pointing at the middle of the lake, and they didn't pursue that. They didn't go through. It's hard to think what they may have, been reflecting on, but it probably was like, what are these guys telling? They're nuts, right? Okay. And the same thing happens with other animals who have very complex, amazing capacities. Like, for instance, hermit crabs. They change the shells where they live, They can choose, this one looks better, right? And, there are many myths about animals that are clearly wrong when you study them and you study their behavior. They say, fishes, they just have a very short memory of 3 seconds. Who said that? What's a stupid idea? Where does it come from? Makes no sense, And in addition, it's not just the behavior. Actually, the physiology of the animals is also amazing, right? The thing is, we are not, this is a very simplified representation of the nervous system. Of course, the nervous system is more complex, but this is just to represent that they do have a nervous system, and that it is, centralized, in this case, in a brain. And that's what allows us to be sentient, right? And this happens, again, with many animals who have nervous systems with such a structure, including many invertebrates, right? Now, not all invertebrates, sponges, for instance, they lack any nervous system. So for them, we can think, what is it like to be a sponge? What kind of mental state they have? Well, it is like this. It's like having no mental states. Or so we can reasonably expect, because they don't have any equipment to be sentient. Then we have other cases where it may be a bit more complex to decide, like, for instance, snails or bivalves. They don't have brains. Nevertheless, they have several pairs of cerebroid ganglia that process information, like clusters of neurons. So maybe those are enough for them to be sentient. In addition, if we consider their behavior, sometimes it's very complex. So, as I said, it's not a matter of magic. It's the fact that we have the physical equipment to be sentient. We have neurons that communicate there. It's about having a brain that computes information. Now, of course, this can be also an argument why you can build maybe on the basis of that a counter argument saying, well, yeah, but if this is so, then maybe eventually there could be, other entities that could be sentient as well, because there are other things that are not biological, that is AIs, that could process information in very complex ways. And the argument to say here, the way to respond to this argument is saying, yes, that is so. So if AIs were sentient, for sure we should respect them. That's not a counter-argument, that's an implication. And we've seen this in many novels and shows, right? When this happens. And it's reasonable to think that, yes, they deserve moral consideration, right? And maybe there will be sentient AIs in the future, and that will be very worrying, right? Given how we treat non-human animals today. Okay, so then, is anthropocentrism right? We can say that, well, in many cases, arguments for it beg the question. There is a species overlap. It's not the case that only humans have certain capacities and other animals or relations and other animals lack them. Then, if we consider the issue impartially, we also think that anthropocentrism is not right. And then, sentience is what we have reasons to regard as relevant. Okay? So, this was maybe like the more philosophical part. I hope that wasn't too boring. But I now want to address certain issues that can be more related to what we can, understand in everyday life. So this gives us reason to consider that anthropocentrism is not right. Accordingly, we can conclude that anthropocentrism is definitely a form of speciesism. Not the only one, though. If, for instance, we treat some non-human animals better than others because they are bigger, because they are animals we consider more beautiful, or they are less numerous, or because, they are not the animals that we eat, or and some others are, like for instance here, if we treat some of these animals better than others, that would be another form of speciesism, right? Unfortunately, the way in which animals are treated today all around the world really reflects this. And this happens, as I say, it doesn't happen in any particular country in particular. This is something that all around the world animals must face. They suffer in many different ways, they are killed when they are very young, and they are crowded. It's not great really to be a non-human animal. If you're harmed by humans, then it can be very bad. Now, this is only becoming worse, by the way, because in the future, this may happen to new animals. Now, it is happening with many invertebrates as well. And we may think that this is intuitive because we've always done it. But it's getting new ways in which it's done. Like, for instance, with genetic technology, we are creating new animals that we may harm in only new ways, right? So maybe this is another implication of anthropocentrism, right? This may also happen, like, for instance, outside Earth. You may think, what are you talking about? Well, can you see that cage there? Can you identify what happens? Well, you can maybe identify that there is an animal here, it's a mouse. There is another mouse here. How come are they flying? Well, this is a cage that is in space. These animals were experimented upon in the International Space Station. So, the future may bring out new harms for animals. The use of AI can also make animal farming even more problematic for animals, right? So this is something that we should be concerned about, right? Because maybe we can bring health to many of them, right? By the way, these pictures come from Norway. There is this place that is called like that, right? Anyway, many people would think that why should we care about whether the lives of humans, the lives of non-human animals are so bad? But the thing is, suppose that you have this button that whenever you press it, you get some benefit, right? Like the benefits humans get from harming animals, but you also make it the case that an animal suffers very terribly and dies. And suppose that in addition to this blue button, red button, there was also this blue button that looks brand new, and you could push it. And if you push it, you get a similar benefit, but without the harms, right? It looks like this is the button we should press, not the red one, right? This is something that most people would agree with, right? And also, it looks like when we are comparing the harms that we cause to animals, we compare them with the benefits we get. It looks like the harms they suffer should be more important, right? So in order to consider this, we can think of this example. Suppose that next week, one day, we were to suffer very bad torture, the worst torture ever, and another day, the mildest pleasure, maybe some nice smell or something. And suppose we could change this in two ways. One way would be by, instead of having the mildest pleasure, get the best joy ever, of which you are able. That's one way of changing this. Another way would be to just keep the mildest pleasure, but set aside the worst torture. Most people would think that this would be preferable, right? But what this indicates is that pleasure is not as important as suffering. Suffering really is very, very bad. And this should drive us to think that it can be good to cause suffering to someone just for the sake of getting a pleasure. Now, I'm aware that this is very controversial, so it's just food for thought here. I'm not telling anyone we should change. I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just providing you with this argument for you to have an idea of what you end up deciding, because at the end of the day, you are your own judges. But I think that, nevertheless, it should be important to bear all this in mind. So, our decisions really are informed. Okay. But then, that was the bad part, but I'm not going to finish with such a, dark scenario. Let's look at the bright side of it. The bright side is that all around the world, there are people helping non-human animals in many different situations. You see? Animals that are harmed in many different ways, they are provided help, right? So there is a different way in which we can do things, and I'm putting lots of examples. You may think, what is this guy or this woman doing here? In fact, they're building, burrows for animals. Isn't that great? Sometimes we can even use technology. Like, for instance, this turbine kill animals, and they are developing these new technologies to scare the animals, in this case, it's seagulls, but if this is a technology that can be expanded for other animals, so they are not hit by these devices, right? And then, for instance, there is increasing research all around the world. This is an example of a wild animal welfare project in NYU. I really think it would be great if in other places, maybe in China, maybe where I come from, similar programs can be implemented. And at Animal Ethics, which is the organization I collaborate with, we actually did a study about whether it's possible to help animals. And we found out that many scientists and students from all around the world, you see participants also from China here, among students and scholars, they reached the conclusion that yes, that there are ways in which we can help animals, like vaccinating wild animals, like helping urban animals, like assisting animals affected by extreme weather events. Also scholars thought this, not only students. So, there is hope. We can do things to improve the lives of animals, right? This thing that you can see here is an example of the former, vaccination. They vaccinate animals by throwing, for instance, these are vaccines against rabies. They throw them from the air. Animals eat them, they get vaccinated, they don't pass the disease to human beings, and they are safe from a horrible death. This is a report from New York University again, about how to help animals in urban areas, right? Very thoroughly researcher report. This is a piece of news on how Spain approved including animal rescue in official protocols when it comes to reacting to natural disasters. So we can do all of this. And this is very important because the lives of animals out there often are very harsh. They suffer for a number of reasons, You see many animals multiply by having many offspring, and only a few of them survive. So, of course, helping animals is great instead of harming them. So I want to conclude by just saying where you can find more information. You can find more information in this book. I'll try to make it the case that the book is available for the Chinese public as soon as I can. It's not that easy, but I'll try. And then you can also download this ebook from Animal Ethics website, which, by the way, is available in many different languages. You have plenty of information, many different pages in Chinese as well. So yes, with that, I think that I will leave it there. Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward for your challenging questions.
Thank you, Horta, for a very passionate speech about the criticism of speciesism. So now I'll hand the podium to Professor Wei Benqun, who will provide a roughly 15-minute commentary on Professor Horta's speech.
Okay, thank you. I think Professor Horta did a fantastic job in making complex ideas simple. First of all, I would like to thank the Berggruen Institute for having me to participate in this great event. I take it very seriously, so I read Professor Horta's paper in advance and I wrote the comments. If you don't mind, I just read my comments. That would be more fluent and time-saving. Okay, so I'm gonna begin. Most of us believe that we're entitled to treat other species in ways which would be considered wrong if inflicted on our own species. For example, we kill non-human animals for food. We keep them confined and we use them in painful experiments. But the question is, what relevant difference justifies such different treatment? According to speciesism, as the term was originally introduced by Richard Ryder and Peter Singer, membership in a species is not in itself relevant to moral treatment. Therefore, a speciesist is morally analogous to a sexist or a racist. Professor Horta's clarification of the concept speciesism sticks to the analogy between speciesism and racism or sexism. According to him, speciesism is the unjustified comparatively worse consideration or treatment of those who do not belong to a certain species. One thing to note about this definition is that it is an evaluative rather than a descriptive conception of speciesism. That is to say, speciesism is unjustified by definition. I think this might cause an issue. On the one hand, it seems to rule out the possibility that the membership in human species is itself a good reason for treating humans and non-human animals differently. But this possible view is actually held by prominent philosophers such as Bernard Williams and Cora Diamond. Of course, Diamond and Williams might be proved wrong ultimately, but they cannot be wrong by definition. If, on the other hand, their views turn out to be correct, that is to say, species membership could by itself justify differential treatment, then according to Professor Horta's definition, both Williams and Diamond would not be counted as speciesist. I think it's quite a strange result, right? It's contravening the core meaning of speciesism. Anyway, I'm wondering how, Professor Horta, how do you think of the view held by Williams and Diamond? And relatedly, why not choose a descriptive account of speciesism so as to leave it open whether speciesism is justified or not? Okay, and according to Professor Horta, any form of discrimination against those who do not belong to a given species is speciesist, and the discrimination involves a lack of justification. Then the question is, on what basis can the differential treatment between human and non-human animals be justified? Here, it seems to me that Professor Horta follows Peter Singer. According to Singer, when it comes to moral consideration, the only characteristic that could make a difference is sentience, especially the capacity to suffer. For Singer, it is in virtue of sentience that the idea of equality is to be justified. To put it shortly, the reason why a person is said to have a right not to be made to suffer pain is that we all do in fact value freedom from pain. Therefore, if anyone has a right to be free from suffering pain, everyone has this right. For there's no possible basis for discrimination. If the capacity to suffer is the reason for ascribing a right to freedom from pain or the right to well-being, then it certainly looks as though these rights must be extended to animals as well. So all beings which have an equal capacity to suffer and enjoy well-being merit equal consideration of interests. And this is important. The equal consideration of interests will often mean quite different treatment, depending on the nature of the creature being considered. So as a result, Singer can allow that non-human animals sometimes receive differential or even worse treatment than human beings. Why? Because we are capable of suffering in many different ways or special ways. But does it follow that sentience is the only consideration that is relevant to moral treatment? Is there really no moral difference between human suffering and animal suffering when the sufferings in question are alike? I don't think so. Feeding a starving child before feeding a starving dog is not the same as feeding a starving man or a white man before feeding a starving woman or a black man. I think we all think that it is morally permissible, or I would say it is obliged to feed the child first, even if the dog is as hungry as the child. And this intuition is not a mere expression of our sentimental preference for our own species. I think it can be justified. One possible justification goes as follows. Certain capacities which seem to be unique to human beings entitle their possessors to a privileged status in the moral community. Such capacities include the capacity to reason and deliberate, the capacity to give and receive justifications, the capacity to make autonomous choices, to be motivated by considerations, to hold moral responsibilities, etc. These capacities provide a minimal level of intelligence, which is a prerequisite for morally relevant achievements. Indeed, I would say without these capacities, there would be no morality at all. Because the existence of the so-called moral point of view depends on such capacities. If, for example, we can free human beings from crippling diseases, pain, and death through experimentation, which involves making, say, a rat suffer, and if this is the only way to achieve such results, then I think such experimentation is justified. Because we have the intelligence which rats do not. And the intelligence cannot exercise if it is devastated by pain or disease. Yeah, I think we all agree that we should keep the pain involved to a minimal level. In a nutshell, we value human beings more than animals because we value certain capacities that human beings have and animals do not. Since freedom from suffering is usually a minimal condition for exercising these capacities, so valuing human more involves regarding human interests as counting for more. That is why we regard children starving as more deplorable than comparable dogs starving. To sum up, I have 3 questions for Professor Horta. First, how do you think of the view held by Bernard Williams and Cora Diamond? Second, why prefer an evaluative account of speciesism to a descriptive account? Third, do you really think that sentience is the only consideration that is relevant to moral treatment? That's all for my comments. Thank you.
Now, since both professors are on stage, let's welcome them for like 10 minutes or 15-minute discussion between the presentation as well as comments between these two professors.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks so much for the presentation, and thank you so much for the commentary. That was great. Thanks for taking the time and the effort of reading the paper and writing that. I really appreciate it. That was fantastic. So I'm gonna say, I think there's like 7 things about what you mentioned. I will address the 3 points that you pointed out, but then I was listening with attention what you were saying, and I think I may add some extra comments. I think, yeah, 7 things. So the first one, brilliant point about the evaluative or normative and the descriptive view of speciesism. So basically the idea is whether speciesism is unjustified by definition. So worse treatment is unjustified if it's to be a speciesism or not. Whether, well, maybe speciesism is correct, right? So then you think, well, your argument was, we should accept a descriptive view because then it's an open question. If someone is a speciesist, that doesn't mean that their view is wrong. That's something that we need to decide later. Whereas I'm saying that speciesism is always wrong, right? So in my view, if you have that person, for instance, suppose that that person defends anthropocentrism, right? In my view, that person is defending, an anthropocentric view. And what is an open question is whether that view is speciesist or not. So for you, the question would be, that speciesist view is justified or not? Yeah. For me, it would be, if it's justified, then that's fine, it's justified, but then it's not a speciesist. That would be my point. I would only call speciesist a view that is unjustified, right?
But what would you call them?
Speciesist? But you mean if, for instance, someone if anthropocentrism
justified
was right,
yeah,
it would be anthropocentrism, but it wouldn't be speciesism, right? So, for instance, suppose that we have schools for humans and not for, I don't know, squids. Is that speciesist? I don't think it's speciesist, right? So that would be my response to the first point. Okay?
Fair enough.
Then, as for Williams and Diamond's views, I think there would be instances of the first form of way of defending anthropocentrism, just by definition, because both of them, I mean, they are well-known philosophers, especially Williams. And Williams says, you see, it's just the mere fact that we are humans that lead us to think that, yeah, we should give priority to humans. He even considered a thought experiment where suppose that humans were in conflict with, I don't know, some alien species that had these cognitive capacities that were more advanced than humans. If what mattered were cognitive capacities, then those alien species should come for more. And Williams says no, because it's just by the mere fact of being humans that humans matter more. And I think for the reasons I mentioned, that this position would beg the question. So that's why I think that we should reject that position. Then, as for third point, as for sentience, do I think that sentience is all that matters? Yes, I think so. So you consider these examples where you compare the interests of a human being and a non-human being. Now, it often happens that by doing something to a human, you may harm that human more than you would harm a non-human animal, right? For instance, I don't know, to consider a case that is very, very simple. Suppose that you don't let a human or a cow to get out from, I don't know, some very large area, like, 10 square kilometers. The cow won't matter, but the human would. right? So that would be a more important harm for the human. But if it's like, if all we are comparing is this amount of suffering, for instance, the same suffering to me and to another animal, I think they should count the same. So if the question is between inflicting me, I don't know, 5 minutes of this suffering with this intensity, or 10 minutes of the same suffering, the same intensity to a dog, I think we should prevent the suffering of the dog.
Really?
Yeah. If there are no further implications,
So
I believe that. And I actually, for instance, I regret things that I did in the past that were harmful for animals. And I would very gladly, if I could change the past and eliminate that and have that suffering inflicted on myself, I would very gladly take it, because I think that I regret having acted in this way. And I also think this with other humans. In the past, because I was stupid, I sometimes did think that hurt other humans and were not justified. I mean, we all have. I regret that. And I hope I didn't do that. And if I could like take it on me instead of those humans, I would have done it. And I would do the same with the animals. So yeah, I mean, because I think that this is the fair thing to do. And I think we are biased, and that's why we don't see it. So another further consideration. Why don't I think that cognitive capacities then make a difference here? For the same reasons I presented before when I draw the circles. If that was what matters for considering someone, then we wouldn't have any reason to give any consideration to a child. And you mentioned, well,
yeah, the species overlap,
right? And then it's like, oh, are we feeding the starving child or feeding the starving non-human animal? Well, but what if the child is very, very, very young? And you know, if it's a 2-month-old baby and you have an adult dog, the adult dog has cognitive capacities that are more developed than the child, right? So then that would be a problem with this as well. So that's why I wouldn't want to go any further in that direction. I have the impression, I would say more things, but I have the impression that you want to respond. So if you want, I mean, I don't need to go into detail if you want to respond something.
Regarding to the species or marginal cases, I think it's a really, really difficult problem. I even doubt anyone could come up with concrete justification for the differential treatment between severely retarded human being and an adult chimpanzee, for example. But one thing I want to bring up is that for me, I think it makes sense to think that I might have been born severely retarded, but it does not make sense to think that I might have been born a pig or a monkey. I think that's the difference, but I'm not sure. I cannot articulate this intuition.
Yeah, no, I understand the argument. It's a clever argument, I think. I don't think it works because I don't think that the respect someone deserves depends on whether it makes more or less sense to imagine one's position. Because, for instance, it makes total sense to imagine that, as I mentioned before, that I could be the president. You know, it makes perfect sense also to think that I could have been born, I don't know, in Beijing. You know.
Yeah.
But that's not gonna grant me a Chinese passport, and that's not gonna grant me access to the privileges and powers that a president has. You know, it's not about what it would be conceivable. It's about what you have, right? So that's why I don't think it really makes the job here.
I think too, that intuition means there seems to be a deeper gulf between different species than different positions or genders in the same species. Actually, I don't know how to articulate this.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, because I can imagine myself much more easily to be a human without certain cognitive capacities
That's
than
right.
to be a non-human animal, then maybe I can think in order to be respected, one only needs to be a human being, right? And you are saying that this is maybe connected to having cognitive capacities because human beings have those cognitive capacities. Maybe that's the view you have. So what I'm saying is, well, first of all, I'm not really that sure that it makes sense to think that I could have been someone else that I'm not. That's a very, well, you see, this is philosophy in action. You know, this is what philosophers do, you know, come up with these fancy examples. So with the methodology, I have several doubts about it. Okay. I don't think it was a methodology, but say we grant the methodology to be correct, right? Then what the method is saying is that if I can imagine myself to be in this situation, then this is relevant. And the argument goes, I don't imagine myself adequately to be a dog. I imagine myself adequately to be a human who lacks these cognitive capacities. So we should respect the latter, not the former. And I'm saying that's not morally relevant. What's morally relevant is being sentient, right? And among other things, what I could say about this is that, as I mentioned before, if what I can imagine more easily made sense to how I am to be treated, then because I can imagine myself very easily, every one of us can imagine themselves very easily, having been born, I don't know, Japanese, well, maybe there is someone Japanese here, but probably not, you know, but we can imagine that. Then when we go to Japan, we can demand, oh, you should treat me as if I were national, which clearly is not the case, or as being the president, or many other examples, right? So that's why I think the argument really doesn't work here. Yeah, and I mean, I would have other things to say, but I think maybe we've been speaking for some time. Maybe it's better to open the ground.
To the audience?
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. Okay, so am I supposed to keep the ball rolling? Okay, so yeah, Q&A session. If you have any questions, raise your hand.
Thank you. And I just wondering. First, I'm so ashamed and sorry. I never think about this topic before. And in my, in 40 years old time, and I just want to ask the speaker and if there is a fire in the art museum or art gallery, and there is a cat in there, and would you save the painting like Mona Lisa, or save that cat? And it's all suppose you can answer it or not. It's all okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a good one. I mean, the way I'm gonna respond is like this. You can think, oh, this is a tricky question. Or you can think, no, it's an easy question. You should rescue the Mona Lisa. Or some people would say, what are you talking about? You should rescue the cat. So I'm not gonna give you a response to that. What I'm gonna say is that you have also a tricky question if instead of a cat, you had a human being, right? So many people would say the work of art instead of the human being because it's a unique work of art and so forth. In fact, this is what happens, right? So, I mean, for instance, during the Civil War in Spain, the Republic of Spain, which was eventually defeated, was putting efforts in safeguarding very important works of art when the far right, the fascist army was bombing Madrid, right? And maybe if they used these resources to save lives, they could have saved more lives, right? But they decided to do that. So it's a tricky question, no matter who is in that situation. Thank you. And by the way, don't feel ashamed or anything. I mean, we are just here sharing ideas, and it's just so great that we can think about these things.
Hello, Professor. We know that many animals are facing extinction nowadays, and many people are trying to prevent it from happening. We criticize humans from harming animals and causing their extinction. But my question is the opposite. Do you think humans have the right to save animals on the verge of extinction and keep them alive?
Well, I mean, helping others looks like a great thing, isn't it? I mean, so I would say that we have the right to do it unless we are harming others more, right? Maybe you are helping this, but in helping this individual, be that individual a human being or an animal, we are harming others. So that would be the limit. It's also important to notice that we've been talking here about individual animals, not species, really. Species are like an abstract concept. They are groups, right? But they don't feel, they don't suffer. They're not sentient, right? They're just groups. But individuals, they are the sentient beings. So when we are talking about protecting animals, really, we are talking about protecting them regardless of the species they belong to. Actually, it is, or it may be argued to be a form of speciesism when we care about certain animals just because they belong to a species that we, like more. Oh, we want these species to be around. So we treat those animals who belong to the species maybe better than we treat others. That may be problematic, right? Of course, it may also happen that we harm the individuals of the species we want to conserve. So we put them in captivity and we do things that are harmful for them. So this shows that the issue can be a bit more complex. Thanks again for the question.
Thank you, Professor. I'm just wondering, would you think that we're using sentience as the standard to distinguish between who should be considered respectful? It's still using our own, it's still like using what we can understand by ourselves. We're still like having, it's kind of like an extended speciesism because you understand like you are like similar to other sentients, while there are also microbes and there are also other like kinds of organisms that are very diverse, that doesn't really have the sentient function. How would you think about those kind of organisms?
Yeah, thank you. Very challenging and interesting question. So, and I think it relates to something that you had in mind also in your commentary, right? So, the thing is, we've seen here sentience as a proxy for being able to be harmed or benefit. When we think, what is it that makes it the case that someone can suffer a harm? It looks like it has to be sentient, because by being able to experience things that can be good or bad for you, you can suffer deprivations of good experiences, but you also can suffer very negative experiences, right? So instead think of yourself, for instance, consider the following case scenario, right? Imagine that if you remember the example of the condition that I put, where 20 years from now, you are deprived forever of your cognitive capacities. We think that even if that happened, we should worry about what would happen to us afterwards, because we would still be there. However, imagine that the case were different. Imagine that what happens to you in 20 years or 5 years or whatever is that you entirely lose sentience, right? You lose consciousness. You are never able to have any experience at all. And suppose that if you pay a lot of money now, you can, after that happens, continue to be kept alive, through some machinery and all that. Would you pay that money now? Most of us wouldn't, right? The idea is that we wouldn't be present there. We would be gone. It would only be our body that would be there, an empty organism without us, right? Because there is no one there having experiences, right? So that would be the consideration, to think that those beings who lack
any capacity for sentience, really, you know, they're like this organism, but there is no one there. There is no first order viewpoint. There is no subjective perspective there, right? It has nothing to do with the fact that we are sentient as well, or that sentient beings are similar to us. In fact, many invertebrates who are, we can claim, sentient are extremely different from us. And I put the example also of some potential, maybe hypothetical, sentient AIs, sentient artificial intelligence. And I said, if they are sentient, they deserve respect. And if maybe, suppose that tomorrow some spaceship from some other galaxy landed here and they were sentient, I think we should respect them, and they would be nothing like us. Maybe they were, I don't know, based not on carbon, but on, I don't know, whatever other, you know, any mineral or whatever, and we should still respect them, not because they are like us, just because they can be harmed. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your lecture. And I have a similar question. You kindly mentioned that sentience is an important factor for moral consideration. So if maybe a rabbit had a disease that leaves it without sentience, can we torture it? And should we give moral status or grant moral consideration to it? And if a human has such disease, unable to feel pain or pleasure, can we torture her or him? Should we give or grant moral consideration to this person? That's my question. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks all for these questions. And if you want to tackle any, I mean, feel free to. No, you can't torture someone who is sentient, because torture consists in inflicting extreme pain to someone. And if someone is not sentient, then that individual cannot suffer any pain, let alone extreme pain. So it's impossible to inflict torture on someone who's not sentient. That's why I can't torture like a table, because the table can't suffer pain. And I cannot torture like a dead human body, because that body wouldn't be able to suffer pain. So that's what I would say about that. Well, any entity, any being without sentience doesn't need moral consideration, because it's not the kind of entity that can be harmed. Like this table, for instance, suppose we give moral consideration to the table. The table is not someone, it's just something. So the table doesn't need moral consideration, because it can't feel any pain, it can't feel any harm. Now, we can grant moral consideration if we want to entities that don't need moral consideration for whatever reason, you know? But that entity wouldn't benefit from it, because it wouldn't be able to be harmed, you know? So for instance, you can suppose that you grant moral consideration to a dead body, you know, maybe out of some respect for death or itself, or for whatever reason. That dead body is dead. So you can't harm, if it's the dead body of a rabbit, you can't harm it. So it doesn't need the moral consideration. That's what I would say.
Okay, so thank you for the talk, and I have to say that I agree with everything you say here. But when I teach speciesism, there's a objections I often encounter that I don't know how to reply. So maybe I'll just put it here, so maybe you can help me out. So some students, they would argue that when you are trying to decide whether something is sentient or not, we have to reason in an anthropocentric way. So when we say that things that has a neural system has sentience, then how do we make those judgments? We see that human beings have a neural system and we are sentient. Therefore, and we imply that other things that has a similar neural system would be similarly sentient. But that is also a kind of anthropocentric reasoning, because we are comparing other things with human beings, and we think that things that are more similar to human beings are more sentient. But what about, say, rocks or, say, plants? Then some people would argue that we can have no way to know whether, say, a plant or a rock is sentient. Just because it doesn't have a neural system doesn't mean that it is not sentient. So they say that, well, there's no way to escape being a anthropocentricist, because of these epistemological problems. So I just wondering, how do we encounter those? How do we respond to those kind of objections?
Wonderful, thank you. And at the beginning of my presentation, I said I was going to say up to 7 things to Professor Wei, and I didn't. I just said 6 in total. And the remaining one, I'm going to say it now. Yeah, we don't have any time, but now I have. Which is that one thing is to be in a situation where you can make decisions. Another thing is to be in a situation where you are affected by those decisions, right? Suppose that you are in a situation where you are in charge of something. You are in governance, for instance. You make decisions that not only affect you, they affect other individuals as well, right? And when you are making those decisions, if you are making them in an adequate way, you not only take yourself into account, you take everyone who's going to be affected into account, right? Just like, if you are a doctor, you don't study medicine only to cure other doctors. It's to cure everyone who needs medical attention, right? So there is this distinction, right? So what's unjustified is not to consider the case, right, on the basis of who can be affected. The key issue is who is affected. It's not who makes the decision. Who makes the decision is relevant for what? For who makes the decision. For what are the criteria to make the decision? For what are the qualifications we take into account for make the decision? Who the decision takes into account, that's something else entirely. The relevant criteria for that are not the criteria about who makes the decision. They are the criteria about who needs the decision to be made about, right? Okay, so this covers generally moral consideration. This is very important because otherwise, if you accept that logic, as I said, the only ones who could eat in restaurants would be restaurant cooks, the only ones who could be going to school would be teachers and so forth. That's clearly not the case. Now, as for what you say concerning the identification of sentience, suppose that things were as you presented, right? And you say, because of this, we are holding an anthropocentric viewpoint. It wouldn't be anthropocentric because what you are considering is only the viewpoint of who is making the decision, right? If anything, it can be anthropocentric when it comes to the epistemic considerations of who makes the decision. But this is not what's relevant here, because we are not talking about who's making the decision. We're talking about who is to be considered in the decisions. And that's something else entirely. For sure, it's us who are humans who think about this. And because we are thinking about this, we may think, okay, yeah, because we have these experiences in this way, and we think about this. And when we know that when we have experiences, that's because our nervous system is working in a certain way. And when our nervous system is not working in that way, then we have different experiences. If you, for instance, if you lose one arm, you can continue to have experiences, but if you lose your head, you can't, right? If you take some drug and that affects your nervous system, then you have hallucinations maybe and so forth, right? And then from then you extrapolate, right? Even if that's so, you are only at the epistemological viewpoint about how I think about this, but not about who you are thinking about that may be sentient. That is the key consideration. If we accept the story you tell us, but I don't even think that we should take that story as it was presented. I think that you can resist that claim from your students in this other way, and this is a further consideration you may consider when you are answering them, which is, when I think about the reasons why I can consider a certain criteria for being sentient are valid or not, I don't think about how you have experiences. I may think about how I have experiences because I don't have access to your experiences, right? So I think from my viewpoint, my own viewpoint about the experiences I have, and then on the basis of this, I make some extrapolation, and then I include other individuals in those extrapolations, right? Including you, right? But in fact, when I do this, I'm not thinking from an anthropocentric viewpoint. I'm thinking from my own perspective. But then, you know, it would be absurd not to think that you are sentient as well. But it would also be absurd not to think that other animals are sentient as well. If you have like interacted with a dog, if you interact with a dog, of course you recognize that the dog is conscious. Come on, give me a break. You know, clearly we see their behavior and we know they're sentient. And we know that they cry, they behave as if they were sentient, you know? And they behave in certain ways when their tissues, when their body are harmed, you know? We know that just as in your own case, if they lose an arm, they can continue to be alive. If they lose their head, they don't continue to be alive. It's just the same as with humans. You may think, oh, well, with humans, maybe they can tell you, they speak, so that's a further consideration. That's not the case because a human can lie. They may tell, oh, I'm so happy, and they are crying, you know. And you're not gonna believe what they're saying, you're gonna believe their behavior, just as you do with non-human animals. Meaning that even if we were anthropocentric from the viewpoint of who makes the decision, that wouldn't be anthropocentric morally or for the attribution of sentience, but we also have reasons not to think that our method is anthropocentric in this way.
Thanks for your comment. I think I'll leave the last question from an online audience, and who is actually a comment, but I'll summarize it into a question. So an audience called Le Bing said, we are currently unable to communicate with animals, so we are not sure they are sharing the same values than our humans do. And we're not sure we can reach a consensus that encompasses all human beings and non-human beings. And he gave us an example. He said a tiger will probably not respect the human right, as proclaimed by Professor Horta, that everybody or every sentient creatures should be treated equally. And he gave another example. He said some very short-lived animals have far greater obsessions with reproduction than suffering or death. So can we still say that our emphasis on what sentient is, what suffering is, and how we should make up our mind to be an anti-speciesist justified? So I'll leave this question to Professor Horta now.
Yeah, so thanks again for the question. The more challenging, the better, really. So, I mean, there were different considerations involved here. So one of them was when it came to saying, oh, well, but the tiger wouldn't respect us. The tiger wouldn't, you know, try to avoid harming us. It looks like this is presented as an objection that it should follow from that we shouldn't respect the tiger, and that we shouldn't respect other sentient animals as well for that reason. But I didn't say any of the kind. I didn't say we should imitate other non-human animals. I think that we should act according to the best reasons we have. And the best reasons we have, because of the arguments that I'm not going to repeat here, should drive us, I believe, to say that we should respect anyone who needs respect, right? Even if that individual is not in a situation to respect us, maybe because that individual lacks the capacity to respect us, right? And babies and many non-human animals don't have those capacities to respect us. So, yeah, fair enough. That doesn't mean we shouldn't respect them, right? Also, you know, the assumption that maybe we should do what the other animals do, it's also kind of weird. I mean, there are lots of things about how tigers live that we don't imitate. I mean, we don't want to like be roaming naked in the middle of the jungle, you know, not meeting with anyone else except maybe with some others, some other individuals to reproduce every now in a while, and not having roofs, not having beds to sleep, not having, I don't know, hospitals, not having libraries and bookstores like this great one. I mean, we want to have all this. We wouldn't if we lived like other animals do. So I don't think that would be a convincing indication for action. Also, I don't think I agree that we can't communicate with non-human animals. I think that we can communicate with some of them, not with others, but with some we can. I mean, anyone who has lived with an animal knows that we can to a certain extent. And it's not either true that we can communicate with all human beings. There are human beings with whom we can't communicate. We may not speak the same language, not have the all the cultural background. We may not have an AI-powered translator, around. So, nevertheless, this is not a reason not to respect those individuals, right? So, in general, I think that this is basically the idea that we can come up with many different ways in which animals may be, or non-human animals may be, that may be different from ours. But that doesn't mean we need to distinguish between how we treat them and how we would treat them if they were human beings, just as we don't do in the case of different human beings. Finally, it is true that animals often have motivations that don't have to do only with pursuing what is good or better for them, just as humans do. So, humans, we often do many things that are worse for us, don't we? Of course, we all know that. Of course, we all would like to, oh, yeah, I would prefer to do this. It would be healthier for me. If I, like, for instance, students, they know that they should study more and their future will be better, but they're lazy, they don't do it. They know they're not doing the best thing for them because they have certain motivations. And to consider a specific example, which was reproduction, basically was about sex, humans also suffer from this problem. Sometimes they want these, they have motivations that are related to that. Like, for instance, when they get in love, I mean, I wonder if in your life you never had this experience of being in love and acting stupidly because of that, and doing things that are silly and that are worse for you, but you can't avoid doing them because you are in love, right? Well, if you haven't had this experience, I congratulate you. But I'm sure many of you have had this experience, right? And it's not good advice. I recommend you don't follow that trend. Or consider like people who are, I don't know, addicted to things that are bad for them. They want to quit smoking. They may not even enjoy smoking, but they have this, it's not good for them. And with animals, it's the same thing. I mean, it's not that they are great, geniuses that know and act according to what they know concerning in every moment what is good for them. But we humans, or with some humans, not all humans, may have the capacity to reflect on this. That doesn't make us, that doesn't make it the case that we deserve a special treatment. It just means that maybe we can reflect on these topics. And I think that was the last question. So I'll just jump for this and say something with which I would like to finish whatever I have to say here. And in addition to expressing my thanks again for organizing this event, I really I'm honored to be at this event by Berggruen. I mean, it's fantastic. But I also want to thank you all for coming here, but also because coming is something you've done, and being here is something that you've done already. But I want to thank you also for what you are going to do. I don't know what you're going to do, really, but I hope and suspect that many of you will be thinking about what we've been speaking here. And that is great. That is great. And at the end of your reflection, I mean, if you ask me, I would obviously hope that you end up being in agreement with me and that you want to respect animals. But just the mere fact that you are going to give this a thought and you are going to consider it seriously without the biases that we are often, trapped in, that is great. That is great. And I really appreciate what you are going to do. And I'm really thankful for that. And I'm just going to encourage you to do this in a way that is free from our privileged perspective. Because, it's very easy to complain against something we perceive as an injustice when we are suffering the injustice. When someone is benefiting from what we do and we are being harmed by that, it's very easy to complain. But what happens when someone else is suffering the harm or we are benefiting from that? That is when we show that we are really the kind of beings that we should be, that we are really good individuals, good people, So I just encourage you to be those kind of people. I just encourage you to, go to bed tomorrow, and before you go to bed, you look in the mirror and think, what I did today made the world a better place or made the world a worse place? That's the key idea. If you want more information to think about this, as I said, you can look at the website, Animal Ethics website in Chinese. You can look for further information, but you have the power to create a better world. And I really hope you put that power in practice. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Horta and Professor Wei, for a fabulous speech and very incisive commentary. And yeah, the last session, the Q&A session, is extremely fruitful. I believe every audience, both online and offline, have very takeaways from both of our professors. So let's call it a day, and thanks for being here online and offline, and good night.